My name is Mara Delgado. At 34, I learned what my own family thought I was worth, $500,000. That's how much my mother-in-law demanded for me to hold my twins again. I stepped off the transport at Fort Bragg on February 8th, jet-lagged and still smelling of Kuwaiti dust, and drove 3 hours to the house I'd dreamed about for 11 months. My duffel was still on my shoulder when I saw the new deadbolt on the front door and the court order taped to the glass. Rain warped. Dated January 4th. Signed by a judge I'd never stood before. Emergency custody, petitioner, Gregory Vance, grounds, abandonment. Affidavit attached from Eleanor Vance, my mother-in-law, stating I had shown no interest in Mateo and Lucia since leaving, that I hadn't contacted them in months, that I'd chosen my career over my children. I stood on that porch in my boots and read the word abandonment 6 times before I folded the paper and put it in my pocket. What none of them knew. I had 337 time-stamped journal entries, 48 video messages, and a daily log of every single attempt I made to call those babies. Most calls blocked, most messages undelivered. Every refusal documented. Eleanor wanted $500,000. She got my notebook, my lawyer, and 12 witnesses watching her sign away everything she thought she was owed. Welcome to the channel. Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Please hit subscribe and like this video to find out how one notarized signature turned a $500,000 demand into the end of Eleanor's control. I landed at Hartsfield-Jackson on a Thursday afternoon, February 8th, bone-tired and smelling like jet fuel and recycled air. 11 months in Kuwait. 105 degrees most days. Dust that got into everything, your boots, your teeth, your lungs, and I'd done it all without a single complaint logged against my name. I was a captain in the United States Army Logistics Corps, and I was good at my job. But the only thing I wanted in that moment was to hold my twins and smell the tops of their heads. Greg wasn't at the airport. I told myself it was a miscommunication. I'd sent him my flight details 3 separate times, including a screenshot of my itinerary the night before I left Ali Al Salam. He'd replied with a thumbs up emoji. That was it, a thumbs up. I'd stared at that little yellow icon for a long time in my bunk, trying to decide if I was being punished or if I'd simply married a man who communicated in pictograms. Now, I took a cab. $47.20 from the airport to our house on Magnolia Lane in Stockbridge, Georgia, a pale blue split level with a sycamore tree in the front yard, and a sandbox Greg had built the summer the twins turned 2. I remember the weight of my duffel on my shoulder, the way the strap bit into the muscle above my collarbone. I remember the daffodils along the front walk. They'd come up while I was gone. I hadn't planted them. My key didn't work. I stood there on the front porch with my duffel sliding off my arm and tried it 3 times. Insert, turn, resistance, pull out, check the key, try again. The deadbolt wouldn't budge. I knocked, waited, knocked again harder. I could hear movement inside, the muffled thump of footsteps, a television playing something with a laugh track, then the sound of the deadbolt turning from the inside, slow and deliberate. Eleanor opened the door. My mother-in-law stood in my doorway, wearing my terry cloth robe, the cream-colored one Greg gave me for my 30th birthday, with her silver hair pinned up in a French twist, and her reading glasses pushed onto the top of her head. Behind her, in my living room, I could see Mateo and Lucia sitting on the floor in front of the television, eating goldfish crackers out of plastic bowls. They looked up when the door opened, but didn't run to me, didn't even seem to register who I was. "Mara," Eleanor said, and her voice was perfectly pleasant, perfectly smooth, like I was a neighbor stopping by to borrow sugar. "You're back? Where's Greg?" I heard myself ask. "Greg is at work." She didn't move from the doorway. Her hand stayed on the doorframe, her body blocking the entrance. "I think it's best if you and I talk before you come inside. The children are settled, and I don't want them upset." I looked past her shoulder at my twins. Mateo's hair had gotten darker, almost brown now, instead of the baby blonde he'd had when I left. Lucia was wearing a dress I didn't recognize, pale yellow, with embroidered daisies on the collar. They were both watching the screen, their small bodies perfectly still. And I realized with a cold wash of clarity that they hadn't expected me. No one had told them I was coming home. "Eleanor, I haven't seen my children in 11 months. Please move." She didn't move. Instead, she reached into the pocket of my robe, and pulled out a folded sheaf of papers, which she handed to me with the calm assurance of someone passing out church bulletins. This is a temporary custody order signed by Judge Harrison on January 4th. Greg filed for emergency custody in November, given your absence and your choices. The court determined it was in the children's best interest to remain here with their father and me while you were overseas. That order is still in effect. I unfolded the papers. The letterhead said Henry County Family Court. The date was January 4th, 2024, a little over a month before I'd set foot back on American soil. The language was dense and formal, but the words, temporary sole custody granted to Gregory Vance, and supervised visitation at the discretion of the custodial parent, cut through me like a blade. I read it twice. Then a third time. My hands were shaking, but my voice came out flat. Nobody served me. I was never notified of any hearing. You were out of the country. These things happen. I had regular mail. I had email. I had a phone. I had a J officer who could have been contacted. Nobody contacted me. Eleanor sighed. The kind of long-suffering sigh she'd perfected over decades of managing difficult situations she herself had created. Mara, I understand you're upset, but the reality is that you chose to leave your 3-year-old children for nearly a year. You chose your career over your family. Greg and I simply did what was necessary to provide them with stability. I chose. She said it so simply, like I'd gone on an extended spa retreat instead of a military deployment I'd been ordered to attend. Like I'd abandoned my children on a whim, instead of leaving them with their father in their own home, with weekly video calls scheduled and a calendar of care instructions taped to the refrigerator. Where is Greg? I asked again. I told you, at work. He'll be home around 6. I'll wait. No, she said, and her voice sharpened just slightly, a paring knife under silk. You won't, not here. The order is clear. You're not to enter the residence without Greg's permission, and he's instructed me not to allow you inside. You're welcome to contact his attorney to arrange a supervised visit at a later date. Lucia looked up then. She turned her head toward the door, and for 1 second her eyes met mine. Those dark brown eyes, my eyes, the ones Greg always said made her look like a little owl. And there was no recognition in them, just a mild, passing curiosity the way a child looks at a stranger through a car window. Then she turned back to the television and picked up another goldfish. That was the moment I felt something crack open inside me. Something deep and structural, like a fault line shifting beneath the foundation I'd spent 7 years building. I didn't cry. I didn't raise my voice. I just stood there on my own front porch with my useless key in my hand and watched my daughter forget me in real time. I'll be back, I said. Tell Greg I'll be back. Eleanor gave me a small, sad smile, the kind you give someone who just doesn't understand how the world works. I'm sure you will, but Mara, do try to be reasonable about all this. The children have adjusted so well. It would be a shame to disrupt that. She closed the door. I heard the deadbolt slide back into place. I stood there for a long minute, my duffel heavy on my shoulder, the custody order crumpling in my grip. The February air was cold and damp, Georgia winter seeping through my uniform jacket. I could hear the television still playing, the canned laughter drifting through the walls of my own house. My house, the one my name was still on. I knew because I'd checked the county property records online from my bunk in Kuwait just 3 weeks earlier, making sure the mortgage was current and the taxes had been paid. I walked back down the driveway and sat in my rental car for 20 minutes with the engine off, reading the custody order line by line. 6 pages. The basis for the emergency filing was concerns regarding the mother's prolonged absence, lack of consistent contact, and emotional abandonment of minor children. There were statements from Eleanor, dated and notarized, a statement from Greg, a reference to documented attempts to maintain contact which were inconsistent and insufficient to preserve the maternal bond. Inconsistent. Insufficient. I had called every single day. Every day for 337 days, I had dialed that number or opened that video app. Some days they answered. Most days they didn't. I had a log of every attempt, timestamped to the minute, with notes about what was said when we did connect and what happened when we didn't. I'd started keeping it in week 2 when I noticed the calls dropping more often, the excuses piling up, bad connection, kids are napping, we have a play date, maybe tomorrow. By month 3, I was documenting everything. I didn't know why at the time, I just knew something felt wrong, and I'd learned in the Army that when something feels wrong, you write it down. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my photos until I found the last video I'd sent, dated February 6th, 2 days before my flight. I was sitting in my quarters, tired and sunburned, holding up a small stuffed camel I'd bought at the base exchange. Hi, babies. Mama's coming home in 2 days, 2 sleeps. I love you so much, and I can't wait to squeeze you. Mateo, I'm going to tickle your feet. Lucia, I'm going to braid your hair. I promise. Mama always comes back. They'd never seen it. I knew because the app showed it as delivered, but unread, same as the 47 videos before it. I put the phone down and sat in the cold car until my hands stopped shaking. Then I opened my contacts and scrolled to a name I'd saved months ago, just in case. Patricia Okonkwo, a family law attorney recommended by a JAG colleague who'd gone through a custody battle during her own deployment. I'd never called her. I told myself I was being paranoid. I called her. She picked up on the 3rd ring. I explained the situation in 12 sentences, calm and factual, the way I drove from Patricia Okonkwo's office to the extended stay hotel off Route 28 and sat in the parking lot with the engine off and my hand still on the wheel, February in Virginia, the cold seeping through the windshield, and I watched a family of 4 walk from the lobby toward a minivan with Florida plates. The dad carried a toddler on his hip. The mom held a little girl's hand. The girl was maybe 4. She had pigtails and light-up sneakers, and she was laughing about something I couldn't hear through the glass. I stayed like that, gripping the wheel until they drove away. Then I went inside, locked the door, and pulled the storage bin out from under the bed. It was a black plastic footlocker I'd bought at the PX right before deployment, the kind privates use in the barracks. Inside, the journal. 3 thumb drives, a Ziploc bag of printed photos, and a manila envelope with every letter and court document Greg's lawyer had sent while I was in Kuwait. I lifted the journal out and set it on the desk. 337 entries, a cheap spiral notebook with a cardboard cover, the kind you can buy for $2, except this one was creased at the corners, and the wire binding had a slight bend from being shoved into my ruck 100 times. I opened it to the first page, March 12th, 2023. 3:47 local, Camp Arijen. Just landed. Dust still on my boots. Called home, but it rang 6 times and went to voicemail. Greg texted, "Kids asleep, call tomorrow." I recorded a 1-minute video instead. Told Mateo and Lucia I love them. Told them mommy is in a place with a lot of sand. Told them I'll count the days. Day 1. I turned the pages slowly, not reading everything, just skimming the dates. March bled into April, April into May, every day. Some entries were a paragraph, some were half a page, some were just 3 lines written after an 18-hour shift when I could barely keep my eyes open. But every day had something. Every single day. I had started the journal because my first CO at Fort Lee, a woman named Sergeant Major Chen, once told me that deployment is a black box for the people back home. They don't see what you're doing, she said. They only see that you're gone. So give them evidence. Write it down. Record it. Don't let them fill the silence with their own stories. I took her advice literally. I wrote about the heat and the food and the sound of the generators at night. I wrote about the time I traded a bag of Skittles for a roll of Kuwaiti stamps at the base post office. I wrote about the day Mateo turned 4, which I spent in a logistics briefing, and how I came back to my bunk and cried for 20 minutes and then recorded a birthday video anyway, singing off-key, holding a cupcake I'd saved from the DFAC with a single candle I lit with a match from my survival kit. The video was time-stamped. The journal entry matched the date. I didn't do it because I expected a custody battle. I did it because I was terrified my children would forget me. I did it because I needed them to know someday that I was thinking about them every single day I was gone, that the silence they felt was something I was filling constantly with love they just couldn't hear yet. But Greg and Eleanor had filled the silence with something else entirely. I closed the journal and sat on the edge of the bed, and for the first time in months, I let myself think about Eleanor Vance, the way you think about a wound you've been ignoring. Not the demand letter, or the $500,000, or the court order. I mean, Eleanor herself. The woman, the slow, patient architecture of what she'd built against me. I met Eleanor for the first time in October of 2018, 3 months after Greg and I started dating. We drove up to her house in Richmond for a Sunday brunch. She lived in a restored colonial on Monument Avenue, the kind of house with a brass door knocker and a magnolia tree in the front yard and a kitchen that looked like it had never been cooked in. She greeted me at the door in a cream-colored linen dress, silver hair pulled back in a low twist, and she smiled and said, "You must be Mara. Greg told me you were pretty, but he didn't say you were fit." She said the word fit, the way someone might say tall or young. An observation, not a compliment. I let it pass. I was 27 and in love, and I wanted her to like me. At brunch, she served quiche and fruit salad and mimosas in crystal glasses that she mentioned had belonged to Greg's great-grandmother. She asked me about my family. I told her my father was a mechanic in Tucson. My mother worked at a public library. I had 2 younger brothers. She nodded and smiled and said, "How wonderful. Greg comes from a long line of attorneys, you know," his grandfather argued before the Supreme Court. She said it lightly, like she was sharing a fun fact. But the message was unmistakable. I didn't come from her world. I was a visitor. Over the next 4 years, the dismissals were small. That was the thing about Eleanor. She never yelled. She never accused. She just noted. She noted that I kept my hair short. It's very practical, isn't it? She noted that I didn't wear much jewelry. Some women just don't care for adornment. She noted that I was gone a lot for training exercises and field rotations. "Greg says you're very dedicated to your work." Every comment wrapped in a smile, every observation delivered with the tone of someone remarking on the weather. If I objected, I looked paranoid. If I didn't, the comments accumulated like silt. When the twins were born in June of 2020, Eleanor showed up at the hospital with a designer diaper bag and an heirloom christening gown that had been in the Vance family for 5 generations. She held Mateo first, then Lucia, and she looked at me over the rims of her reading glasses and said, "You'll want to take plenty of time off, dear. The military can wait. Children need their mother present." There it was again, that italicized word, present. As if presence was a location and not an action. As if you couldn't be present from 6,000 miles away. I took 8 weeks of maternity leave and then went back to duty. Eleanor was appalled. She didn't say, appalled. She said, "I just worry about the children's attachment." She said it to Greg, not to me, and Greg repeated it to me later as if it were a medical concern. "My mom thinks the kids need more consistency," he said. I pointed out that I was home every night by 6, that I did bath time and bedtime, and every single weekend. "I know," he said. "I told her that." But he didn't push back. Greg never pushed back. Greg was a man who had been raised to defer to his mother's judgment the way some people are raised to say please and thank you, automatically, without thinking. I read later they have a name for what Eleanor was doing. Coercive control dressed as grandmotherly concern, a pattern of quiet undermining so consistent and so subtle that by the time you recognize it, everyone else has already accepted her version of reality as fact. At the time, I just felt tired. The deployment orders came in January of 2023, 11 months to Kuwait, supporting logistics operations for CENTCOM. I told Greg first. Then we told Eleanor, together. We sat in her living room,
the one with the Persian rug and the portrait of Greg's late father above the fireplace, and I explained the timeline and the child care plan. My mother would fly out from Tucson for the first 2 months. Then Greg would take over with the help of a nanny we'd already hired. Eleanor listened, her hands folded in her lap, and when I finished, she said, 11 months is a very long time for children that age. They won't understand where you've gone.
"They'll think you've abandoned them," I said. "I'll video call every day. I'll send messages. I'll make sure they know I'm still here." She tilted her head. "That's not the same as being here, is it? Not a question. A verdict." Greg said nothing. He was sitting on the sofa next to me, and he looked at his hands, and he said nothing. I deployed on March 12th. For the first few weeks, the video calls went through. I'd wake up at 0400 Kuwait time to catch the kids before their bedtime in Virginia, and Greg would prop the tablet on the kitchen table, and Mateo and Lucia would press their faces to the screen and shout, "Mommy!" And I'd read them a story or sing the same lullaby my mother used to sing to me. It was hard, but it worked. And then, slowly, the calls started getting shorter. Greg would say the kids were tired or distracted or not in the mood. Then he started missing the scheduled times. I'd call and get voicemail, I'd text and get a reply 3 hours later. "Sorry, crazy day." By June, I was lucky to get one call a week. I didn't know at the time that Eleanor had moved into the guest room. I didn't know she was the one putting the kids to bed while Greg worked late, that she was the one taking them to the pediatrician and the playground and the library story hour. I didn't know she was telling people, neighbors, preschool teachers, the other mothers at the parksies, that I had chosen to leave, that I had prioritized my career, that Greg was essentially a single father. I found that out later from the affidavits attached to the custody filing. Eleanor had collected statements from 6 different people who all used the "I woke at 0500 out of habit," body still on Kuwait time, even though I'd been back on U.S. soil for 2 weeks. The dark bedroom felt too soft, too quiet, no hum of generators or distant rotor wash. I lay there a minute, staring at the ceiling, then got up and made coffee the way I'd learned to in the sandbox. Pour over, slow, 1 cup at a time. The ritual steadied me. Patricia's email sat in my inbox, unread since the night before. Eleanor's financials, interesting. I didn't open it yet. I wanted my mind clear first. I wanted to be sitting at my kitchen table with the sun up and my hands around a warm mug before I let that woman take up any more space in my head. So I did what I'd done every morning for 337 days. I reached for my deployment journal. It was a plain black moleskin, the large size, 240 pages. I'd bought it at the PX at Camp Arifjan 3 days after I landed in Kuwait, back in March of 2023. I still remember standing in the aisle, exhausted from the flight, looking at the blank pages and thinking, I will not let my children forget my voice. I didn't know then that Eleanor was already laying groundwork. I didn't know Greg was already wavering. All I knew was that I was 7,000 miles from 2 3-year-olds who still called me Mama in that wobbly, just-learned way. And I had 11 months to get through, so I started writing. The first entry was dated March 15th, 2023. I flipped to it now, coffee steaming beside me, and read my own handwriting. Mateo, Lucia, Mama is in a place called Kuwait. It's very dusty and very hot, and the sun is a different color here, sort of white gold. I miss your sticky hands. I miss the way Lucia says lello instead of yellow. I'll be home before you know it, but until then, I'm going to write to you every day, every single day, I promise. I smiled at the page. I'd kept that promise. 337 entries. Some were a paragraph, some were 3 pages. Some were written at 0200 after a 16-hour shift. My handwriting slanted and shaky with fatigue. But I never missed a day. Not when we had sandstorms that knocked out power for 12 hours. Not when a convoy got hit and we lost 2 soldiers and I couldn't stop shaking. Not on their birthday, when I sat in my quarters and cried for an hour and then wrote 4 pages about the day they were born, the emergency C-section, the way Mateo came out silent and then screamed, the way Lucia grabbed my finger with a grip like iron. I didn't just write. I recorded. My laptop had a built-in camera, and every 3rd or 4th day, I'd prop it up on a stack of field manuals and talk to my kids. Short videos, 3 to 7 minutes each. I'd show them my cot, my uniform hanging on a hook, the ugly tan walls. I'd show them the camel spider I caught in a cup once, and the sunrise over the desert, all pink and orange and hazy with dust. I'd read them picture books I'd packed in my duffel, Goodnight Moon, The Gruffalo, Llama Llama, Red Pajama, holding the pages up to the camera so they could see the illustrations. 48 videos by the end. I'd uploaded them to a private cloud folder, date-stamped, metadata intact. I hadn't thought of them as evidence. I'd thought of them as a lifeline. The journal was the same. It was just for me, just for them. A way to stay tethered, but I was meticulous by training. Logistics officers don't survive on sloppiness, and I dated every entry, logged the time, noted where I was. Camp Arifjan. Ali al-Salem, a forward operating base I can't name. The rhythm of it kept me sane. Wake up, shower if the water was working, coffee, journal. At night, if I had bandwidth, a video. If not, another entry before sleep. I didn't tell Greg about the videos, not at first. I sent him photos, quick texts when I had signal, a weekly phone call when the time zones aligned. He always sounded tired, distracted, but I told myself it was just the strain of solo parenting 2 3-year-olds. I'd ask about the kids, and he'd say they were fine. Eleanor was helping a lot. Everything was under control. I felt guilty for being gone. I sent money. I said thank you more than I should have. I didn't know that by month 4, Eleanor had moved into the guest room. I didn't know she was the one answering Mateo's questions about where Mama was. She's away, Eleanor would say in that careful, pitying tone. She chose to go. Some mothers do that. Greg told me that later, much later, after the court order, after the custody filing, after I came home to a locked house and a stack of legal documents on the front porch like a welcome mat. He told me on the phone, voice flat and strange, that his mother had explained things to him, that I'd abandoned the family, that a real mother wouldn't volunteer for a deployment with toddlers at home, that the kids were starting to forget me, and maybe that was for the best. I remember sitting on the floor of my barracks room in Kuwait when he said that, the satellite connection crackling and feeling something inside me go very still. Not broken, not shattered, just still, like a machine switching into a different gear. I didn't yell, I didn't cry. I opened my journal and wrote the date, October 8th, 2023. And underneath it, Greg says the kids are forgetting me. Eleanor told him that. I don't know if I believe her, but I know I believe this journal. I believe these 206 entries. I believe the videos. They are proof that I was here, thinking of my children every single minute, even when I was doing my job, even when I was briefing convoy routes, even when I was sleeping. I was here. I was present. The fact that I was 7,000 miles away does not erase that. I kept writing after that call, kept recording. The videos got longer, more deliberate. I started telling the kids stories about my own childhood, about my abuela in El Paso, about the time I fell into the Rio Grande when I was 6, and my cousin pulled me out by my hair, about the first time I saw snow at basic training in Missouri. I wanted them to know me, not just as Mama, but as Mara, as a whole person with a history and a laugh and a temper and a terrible singing voice. February 8th, 2024, the day I landed back at Fort Hood. I had my journal in my carry-on, all 337 entries, and my laptop with 48 video files backed up twice. I didn't know yet that Greg had filed for emergency custody on January 4th, citing abandonment and emotional neglect. I didn't know Eleanor had submitted an affidavit full of lies about my supposed disinterest, my supposed lack of contact. I didn't know a judge had signed an order restricting my access to my own children until I underwent a psychological evaluation. I found out on the porch the papers were in a manila envelope, damp from rain. I read them standing in the cold, my duffel still on my shoulder, my key not working in the lock Greg had apparently changed. And for about 30 seconds, I felt the full weight of it. The betrayal, the rage, the fear that maybe I really had been gone too long, that maybe my children really didn't know me anymore. Then I thought of the journal. I thought of the videos. I thought of 337 mornings and 337 nights, and every word I had written with my own hand. Every frame of footage with a timestamp and a date. I called Patricia Okonkwo from the front steps. I told her I had evidence, a lot of it. She asked me to send samples. I did. 6 entries and 2 videos, right there from my phone. She called back in 40 minutes. Her voice was different, sharper. Mara, she said, this is a contemporaneous record spanning nearly a year. Daily entries, dated, video corroboration. This isn't just character evidence. This is a rebuttal to every claim they've made. Keep everything. Back it up. Don't send it to anyone but me. I sat on those cold concrete steps, and I promised her I would. Now, 2 weeks later, at my kitchen table with the morning sun coming through the window, I closed the black moleskin and set it beside my laptop. 48 videos, 337 entries, a deployment's worth of love, logged and recorded and waiting. I opened Patricia's email. Eleanor's financials, it read. She's carrying more debt than a woman with her lifestyle should. 2 mortgages, both underwater, credit card balances north of $80,000, and a balloon payment coming due on a commercial property in Austin March 31st. Amount due, $487,000 and change. I stared at the number. Then I looked at the demand letter Eleanor had sent me, still sitting on the corner of the table. $500,000 to make the custody issue go away. Dated February 20th, 2024, 11 days after I got home, the balloon payment was due March 31st. I sat back in my chair. The coffee had gone cold. Outside, a neighbor's dog barked twice and fell silent. Eleanor didn't want me gone because she thought I was a bad mother. She wanted me gone because she needed $500,000 and she thought she'd found a way to get it. I reached for my journal one more time and opened it to a blank page at the very back. I uncapped the demand letter, arrived on a Tuesday, February 20th. Gray sky outside the window of my temporary apartment, the one with the beige walls and the refrigerator that hummed too loud. I'd been back on American soil for 12 days, and I still woke up at 04:30 every morning, body still on Kuwait time, mind still running supply chain logistics in the dark. Patricia Okonkwo called me at 9:17 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was staring at the microwave clock, waiting for the coffee to finish, and the numbers flipped from 9:16 to 9:17 as my phone buzzed on the counter. Mara, I need you to come to my office. This morning, if you can. Patricia's voice had a particular quality when she was angry. She got quieter, not louder. I'd learned that about her in the 3 weeks she'd been representing me, 52 years old, Nigerian-born, law degree from Georgetown, and a stillness in her posture that reminded me of my battalion commander. She didn't waste words. What happened? Eleanor's attorney sent something over. I'd rather you read it in person. I drove to her office in Silver Spring. The building was brick, 3 stories, with a parking lot that sloped downward toward a drainage ditch full of dead leaves. I parked and sat in the car for 2 minutes, hands on the wheel, engine off. A woman walked past with a golden retriever on a leash. The dog stopped to sniff a fire hydrant. Ordinary life happening all around me while I tried to remember how to breathe. Patricia's office smelled like paper and toner and something faintly floral, hand lotion maybe. She had a window that looked out onto a row of townhouses, and her desk was covered in manila folders with colored tabs sticking out the sides. She didn't make small talk when I sat down. She just handed me a sheet of paper in a clear plastic sleeve. "Read it slowly," she said. The letter was printed on heavy ivory stationery. Eleanor's attorney, a man named Harold Bremner, whose name I'd seen on 3 previous filings, had written 3 paragraphs. I read them once, then I read them again. This letter is to propose a mutually agreeable resolution to the above-captioned matter. My client, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, is prepared to withdraw her petition for permanent guardianship and consent to the restoration of full parental rights to Captain Mara Delgado, contingent upon the following terms. 1. Payment in the amount of $500,000. $500,000.00 to be transferred to an account designated by my client within 30 calendar days of the execution of this agreement. 2. Execution of a mutual non-disparagement clause, preventing either party from making public or private statements regarding the custody proceedings. 3. Relinquishment of any and all claims Captain Delgado may have against Mrs. Vance arising from the period of temporary guardianship, including but not limited to claims of alienation of parental affection, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and fraud. This offer shall remain open for a period of 14 days from the date of this letter. I set the paper down on Patricia's desk. My hand was steady. That surprised me. I'd expected it to shake. She's selling me my own children. Patricia leaned back in her chair. The springs creaked. Essentially, yes, $500,000. The exact amount, I suspect, is not arbitrary. Does that number mean something to you? I looked out the window at the row of townhouses. A bicycle leaned against one of the front stoops, a child's bike, pink handlebars, training wheels still attached. Greg and I have a joint savings account. It has about $80,000 in it. My military pay, His salary from the county. That's not what she's after. Then what? I turned back to Patricia. My father died 6 years ago. He left me a house in Santa Fe, paid off. 3 bedrooms, adobe walls, a courtyard with a lemon tree. The market went up. It's worth about $470,000 now, plus my TSP, that's the military retirement account. I've been contributing max for 11 years. That's another 130, give or take. Patricia was quiet for a moment. Then she picked up a pen and wrote something on the yellow legal pad in front of her. She's done the math. She's done the math. Eleanor knew about the house. She'd visited once, back when Greg and I were engaged. We'd flown to Santa Fe for a long weekend, and Eleanor had walked through every room, touching things. The hand-carved beams in the living room ceiling, the saltillo tiles in the kitchen, the Kiva fireplace my father had built himself in 1987. At the time, I thought she was admiring the house. Now I understood she was appraising it. She thinks I'll liquidate everything, I said. Sell the house, drain the retirement account, hand her $500,000, and walk away like none of this ever happened. That's what the letter proposes. And if I don't, Patricia picked up the letter and held it between 2 fingers, like it was contaminated. Then the guardianship petition proceeds. Trial date is set for April 22nd. She'll argue that you abandoned your children for 11 months, that Greg is unable to care for them alone
Due to his work schedule, that she has provided the only stable home environment, and that returning the twins to you would be disruptive and contrary to their best interests, even though I was deployed.
Even though you were deployed. Her attorney's position, as you know, is that you volunteered for the deployment, that you had options, that you chose your career over your children. I'd heard this before. I'd heard it in the emergency custody order dated January 4th, which I received at Camp Arifjan, in a prefab office with sand blowing against the windows and a chaplain standing awkwardly in the corner because someone thought I might need spiritual support. I'd read the words then, "Mother has demonstrated a pattern of absence," and I'd felt something crack open inside me that I wasn't sure would ever close again. But now, sitting in Patricia's office with the demand letter in front of me, I didn't feel cracked. I felt something else, something colder and more focused. She miscalculated, I said. Patricia raised an eyebrow. She assumed I'd panic. She assumed I'd see this letter and think, I'm going to lose my children forever unless I pay. She assumed I'd be so desperate to see Mateo and Lucia that I'd do anything. Most people would. I'm a logistics officer. I spent 11
months tracking supply chains across a combat theater. I know how to plan, and I know how to wait, and I know how to read a demand signal for what it is.
I reached into my bag. The journal was there, as it always was, the cover worn soft at the corners, the spine cracked from being opened and closed 337 times. I didn't take it out. I just touched the edge of it, felt the weight of it, the proof of it. She doesn't know about the videos, I said. She doesn't know I recorded messages for the kids every single day. She doesn't know I kept a log with timestamps and locations and the little details, what they ate for breakfast the morning I left, the name of Mateo's favorite stuffed dinosaur, the lullaby Lucia wanted me to sing 3 times in a row. She has no idea what's in this journal. Patricia set her pen down. You've never mentioned a journal. I wasn't ready to. I needed to understand what she was really after. Why now, I do. The letter lay on the desk between us. $500,000. The price Eleanor had placed on my children, on my right to hold them, to read to them, to watch them grow from 3-year-olds into 4-year-olds with longer legs and bigger words and opinions about everything. I thought about the last video I'd recorded. Day 337. February 7th, the night before I flew home. I'd sat on my cot in the barracks, the camera propped on a stack of manuals, and I'd said, Mama's coming home tomorrow, babies. I'm going to be on a plane for a very long time, and then I'm going to be in a car, and then I'm going to be at your door, and I'm not leaving again, I promise. Mama's not leaving again. I hadn't known when I recorded that message that there wouldn't be a door. That Greg would have moved out of our house in Stockbridge by the time I landed, that the twins would be at Eleanor's, that a judge in Montgomery County would have signed an order saying I couldn't see my own children until a hearing 3 months later, but I knew now. And I knew what I had Don't respond to the letter, I told Patricia. Mara, we have 14 days. I know, don't respond. Let the deadline pass. Let her wonder. Patricia studied me for a long moment. Her face was unreadable, but something moved behind her eyes. Recognition, maybe. She'd seen clients break. She'd seen clients rage. She hadn't seen this. What are you going to do? She asked. I stood up. The chair scraped against the floor. I'm going to make copies of everything, the journal, the videos, the timestamps, and then I'm going to send it all to Harold Bremner, with a note saying that if Eleanor doesn't withdraw the petition voluntarily, I will read every single entry aloud in open court. I picked up my bag. The journal was inside, solid and real against my hip. She showed her hand, I said. I slept badly that night, but not from worry. It was the kind of restlessness that comes when you know you're about to do something irreversible, and your body won't let you forget it. I got up at 5, made coffee, and sat in the dark with my journal open on the table. I'd read all 337 entries the day before, cover to cover, and something had settled in me, a quiet certainty. Eleanor thought she was dealing with a woman who'd been broken by 11 months overseas and a husband who'd folded. She was wrong. The meeting was set for 10 a.m. at a title office in Stockbridge, a small beige building wedged between a nail salon and a check-cashing place. Eleanor had picked it. Neutral ground, she'd said on the phone, her voice syrupy with fake accommodation. I wore my Class A uniform. I wasn't trying to intimidate anyone. I wanted her to see exactly who she'd tried to erase. The jacket was pressed, ribbons in place, hair in a tight bun. When I looked in the mirror before leaving, I saw my mother's face staring back at me. She'd been gone 6 years now, and I could almost hear her voice. Mia, the quiet ones always win. I arrived at 9:47. Patricia Okonkwo was already there, standing by her silver sedan with a leather briefcase in one hand and a cardboard box in the other. The box held the journals and the printed screenshots of every video message I'd sent the kids, time-stamped and organized by month. She'd insisted on bringing the physical copies even though everything was also digitized. People believe what they can touch, she'd said. I'd learned to trust her instincts. Ready? She asked. I nodded. Let's go. The title office smelled like old carpet and lemon-scented cleaner. A woman at the front desk pointed us toward a small conference room in the back. Eleanor was already there, seated at the head of a long laminate table like she owned the place. She wore a cream blouse with a silk scarf tied at her throat. Pearls. The whole performance. Greg sat to her left, shoulders hunched, staring at his hands. He didn't look up when I walked in. On the table between them was a manila folder and a black pen, perfectly aligned. Eleanor's lawyer, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses named Mr. Collier, sat to her right, with a laptop open and a notary seal resting on a stack of papers. I took the chair opposite Eleanor. Patricia sat beside me and placed the box on the floor. The room was too warm. A wall clock ticked loudly from somewhere behind my head. Eleanor smiled. It was the smile of a woman who believed she'd already won. Mara, I'm so glad you came to your senses. This doesn't have to be difficult. I didn't answer. I looked at Greg. He finally raised his eyes, and what I saw there was worse than anger. It was emptiness. The man I'd married, the one who used to leave notes in my lunchbox when I was at Fort Bragg, the one who held my hand through 18 hours of labor with the twins, he was a shell. His mother had hollowed him out and climbed inside. I turned back to Eleanor. You have the agreement? She slid the folder across the table. I opened it slowly, letting the silence stretch. The document was 5 pages. In essence, I would transfer $500,000 into an account controlled by Eleanor Vance, designated as a family support fund for Mateo and Lucia, and in return, she would withdraw her objections to my custody petition and facilitate reunification. The language was slippery. Facilitate. It didn't promise anything concrete. It was a payoff. Dressed up in legal drapery, I read every line. The clock ticked. Someone in the front office laughed at something on their computer. Patricia's pen scratched against a notepad. Then I closed the folder and said, I'll sign on one condition. Eleanor's smile tightened at the corners. And what's that? I want a notarized statement from you, a separate document. You'll state, under penalty of perjury, the exact reason you sought emergency custody of my children while I was deployed. Not the reason you told the court, the real reason. You'll write it in your own words, and you'll sign it in front of the notary. Then I'll sign your agreement, and we'll be done. Her eyes flicked to Collier. He gave a small shrug, the kind that said it's unusual, but not problematic. Greg shifted in his chair and opened his mouth as if to speak, but Eleanor put a hand on his arm and he deflated. "That's a very strange request," she said. "It's non-negotiable." The silence stretched. I could feel Patricia beside me, perfectly still, her breathing even. She'd coached me on this. "Let her talk," she'd said. "People like Eleanor can't resist explaining themselves. They think their reasons are justified. Give her the rope." Eleanor studied me for a long moment. I think she was trying to find the trap. But greed is a powerful blindfold, and she wanted that money. Maybe she'd already spent it in her head. Maybe she'd pictured the renovations on her house, the new car, the cruise she'd mentioned to Greg last Christmas. I'll never know. "Fine," she said. "Collier, draft something up." The lawyer typed for a few minutes, then printed a single page. It was bare bones. A blank space for her statement, a signature line, a notary block. He slid it across the table with a pen. Eleanor picked up the pen and began to write. Her handwriting was small and precise, the letters pressed hard into the paper. I watched her hand move across the page, line after line. Greg stared at the wall. The notary, a young woman with pink-framed glasses, waited by the door with her stamp. When Eleanor finished, she pushed the paper toward me without a word. I picked it up and read. "I, Eleanor Vance, hereby state that I sought emergency custody of my grandchildren, Mateo and Lucia Vance, because I believed their mother, Mara Delgado, had abandoned them by choosing her military career over her family. I believe a mother's place is in the home, and I acted to protect the children from a woman who prioritizes her own ambitions over their well-being. I do not believe Captain Delgado is a fit parent, and I sought custody to ensure the children are raised with proper values." It was breathtaking. She'd actually written it down, in her own hand, signed and dated. I read it twice. The room was so quiet I could hear the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Patricia leaned over and read it too, and when she looked at me, her expression was perfectly neutral, but I saw the slight nod. "There it is." I placed the statement on the table and said, "Have it notarized." The young woman stepped forward, stamped the page, signed her name, and added the date in neat block letters. She handed it back to Eleanor, who slid it across the table to me with a thin smile. "Satisfied?" Eleanor asked. I didn't answer. I picked up the notarized statement, folded it carefully, and placed it in the inside pocket of my uniform jacket. Then I reached down and lifted Patricia's cardboard box onto the table. The weight of it made a solid thump. "What's this?" Eleanor asked, her smile flickering. I opened the box. Inside were the journals, all 3 volumes, their covers worn, pages marked with colored tabs, and the printed screenshots, and a USB drive with all 48 video messages, each one showing me in my uniform, in my bunk, reading bedtime stories, singing the same lullaby my mother sang to me, telling Mateo and Lucia goodnight by name, every single day for 337 days. I didn't raise my voice. I said, very quietly, "This is the evidence that you lied to the court, Eleanor. You told them I abandoned my children, but I never missed a day. Not one. I have proof of every bedtime, every story, every song. I was more present as a mother from a desert base in Kuwait than you've been as a grandmother from 15 minutes away." The color drained from her face. Collier's fingers stopped typing. Greg sat up straighter, his eyes moving from the box to his mother and back again. "You can keep your agreement," I said. "I'm not paying you a cent, but I am filing this statement, your statement, with the family court, along with my evidence. You just admitted, in writing, under oath, that your custody petition was based on personal bias, not fact. You said it yourself. You don't think I'm a fit parent because I chose to serve my country. That's not a legal reason to take someone's children. That's discrimination, and now I can prove it." Eleanor's mouth opened and closed. For the first time since I'd met her, she had nothing to say. I stood up. Patricia gathered the box. Greg was staring at me now, his expression unreadable, but I didn't have the space to process him yet. That would come later. As I walked out of the conference room, I heard Eleanor's voice behind me, thin and shaking. "You can't do this." I didn't turn around. The front door of the title office swung open, and the February air hit my face, cold and clean. Patricia walked beside me to the car, and when we reached it, she set the box in the back seat and said, "That was beautiful." I looked down at my hands. They were steady. After everything, they were steady. We drove back to the apartment, and I sat at the kitchen table with the notarized statement in front of me. The microwave clock read 12:17. I opened my journal to the back the morning of court. I woke at 4:52 without an alarm. My body had learned to rise before the sun in a desert on the other side of the world, and it hadn't unlearned it yet. I stood at the bathroom sink and brushed my teeth slowly, watching myself in the mirror. The woman looking back had cheekbones sharper than they used to be, and a thin white scar on her left temple from a cargo loader mishap at Camp Arif Jan that no one in this courthouse would ever ask about. I put on my service uniform, Class A's, ribbons aligned, nameplate, Delgado. I'd earned the right to wear it. More than that, I'd earned the right to walk into whatever room came next and not flinch. Patricia Okonkwo met me in the hallway outside the family court on the 3rd floor of the Alameda County Superior Courthouse. 8:14 a.m., 21 minutes before we were due inside. She wore a navy suit and carried 2 thick expanding folders, one under each arm like she'd done this 1,000 times and wasn't worried about the 1,001st. "You ready?" she asked. I nodded. "Ask me again after." "Good answer." She didn't smile. Patricia wasn't a smiler. That's why I'd hired her. We walked in together. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood-paneled walls, fluorescent lights that hummed just slightly, a bench that sat elevated behind a heavy oak desk. The bailiff was a lean man in his 50s with a gray mustache and a posture that said he'd seen everything and was no longer surprised by any of it. To my left, at the petitioner's table, sat Greg and Eleanor. Greg looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. His tie was crooked, a pale blue thing I'd bought him for a cousin's wedding 3 years ago, and his hands were folded on the table in front of him like a schoolboy waiting for a reprimand. He wouldn't look at me, not once. Not when I walked in, not when I took my seat 20 feet away, not when the bailiff announced Judge Marcia Hasegawa. His eyes stayed on the wood grain of the table, and I thought, that's the man I married. That's the father of my children, and he can't even lift his chin. Eleanor sat beside him in a cream-colored silk blouse and a string of pearls that I knew for a fact were real because she told me so the first time I complimented them, 8 years ago, at a Thanksgiving dinner where she also told me my stuffing was ambitious for a military girl. Her posture was perfect. Her hair was silver and set in a wave that didn't move. She looked at me with the kind of calm that comes from being absolutely certain you've already won. I didn't look away. I didn't stare. I just let her be in my peripheral vision, a ghost I was about to lay to rest. Judge Hasegawa entered at 8:35. She was a small woman, Japanese-American, with glasses that sat low on her nose and a voice that carried without needing to rise. She'd been on the family court bench for 19 years. Patricia had told me that during our prep sessions. She's seen every version of this, Patricia said. Mothers who actually abandoned their kids, fathers who lied about their income, grandparents who weaponized the system. If you give her facts, she'll recognize them. I was counting on that. The judge settled into her chair, adjusted her glasses, and opened the file in front of her. This is the matter of Vance versus Delgado, case number FC-2024-0187. Emergency custody order filed by Gregory Vance on January 4th of this year, alleging abandonment and unfitness on the part of the respondent, Captain Mara Delgado. She looked up. Ms. Okonkwo, I understand the respondent has filed a motion to vacate the emergency order and dismiss with prejudice. Is that correct? It is, Your Honor. Grounds? Patricia stood. Material misrepresentation to the court, lack of standing, and the introduction of evidence that directly contradicts the factual basis of the original petition. Eleanor's lawyer, a man named Richard Keene, 60-ish, expensive suit, The kind of attorney who sends Christmas cards to people he's never met. Started to rise. Your Honor, the petitioner objects to the characterization of Judge Hasegawa held up one hand. Sit down, Mr. Keene. I haven't heard the evidence yet. You'll get your turn. He sat. Eleanor's jaw tightened just slightly. The pearls shifted on her collarbone. Patricia walked to the center of the room and placed the first exhibit on the evidence table. A thick black binder. Your Honor, this is Exhibit A, a deployment journal kept by Captain Delgado during her 11-month deployment to Kuwait from March 12th of last year to February 8th of this year. It contains 337 daily entries, each time-stamped, each addressed to her children, Mateo and Lucia Vance. The judge opened the binder. The room went quiet. I knew what she was seeing. The first entry, dated March 12th, 2023, 5:47 a.m. local time, which was 7:47 p.m. back in California, right after bedtime. I'd written it on a metal folding chair outside my barracks, the desert still cool before the heat of the day kicked in. Mi Mateo, mi Lucia, Mama está lejos, pero no ausente. Tu voz está en mi cabeza todo el día. Your voice is in my head all day. Below it, a photo of the sunrise over the camp. Below that, a note about what I imagined they'd eaten for dinner based on the day of the week. Wednesday meant spaghetti at Greg's mother's house. I'd guessed right. Judge Hasegawa turned a page, then another, then another. March 17th, a video message log. 6:03 a.m., 3 minutes and 42 seconds, me singing Cielito Lindo into a laptop camera with my hair in a regulation bun, still in my PT gear. April 2nd. Lucia's half-birthday. I'd recorded myself singing Happy Birthday while holding a piece of paper with a cupcake drawn on it in blue pen because that's what I had, May 11th. An entry about how much I missed the smell of their shampoo, the lavender one from the co-op on Park Street, and a promise that when I came home, I'd wash their hair myself 100 times. June, July, August. The judge kept turning pages. The fluorescent lights buzzed. Eleanor's lawyer shifted in his chair. Greg stared at the table. September 23rd. The day, Mateo fell off the play structure at the park and needed 3 stitches in his left eyebrow. I knew about it because my sister-in-law, Greg's sister, Carmen, had called me against Eleanor's explicit instructions. I wrote it down anyway. Your tia Carmen told me you were brave, Mateo. You didn't cry until the 3rd stitch. I cried in my bunk that night and no one saw. That's our secret. Below it, a drawing of a bandage with a smiley face. October 14th, a video message. 11 minutes, the longest one, where I read them Good Night Moon in Spanish while holding the book up to the camera. I had bought a copy at the PX just so I could. The pages were worn by then. The spine cracked from doing it over and over. November 28th. Thanksgiving. I'd eaten a tray of turkey in a chow hall with 200 other soldiers and wrote that I was grateful for the sound of their voices on the one phone call, Eleanor, aloud. 4 minutes, the entry said. She timed it. I heard the timer go off in the background. I will never forget the sound of that beep. Judge Hasegawa paused there. She looked up at Eleanor for the first time. Just a beat, then she went back to the journal. December, Christmas, New Year's, January, the month Greg filed the emergency petition, the month he told a court I had abandoned my children, emotionally and physically, and shown no consistent effort to maintain contact. I'd written that day. January 4th, 2024. Today someone told a lie about me in a building I've never seen. I don't know what happens next, but I know what I've done. I've shown up here on these pages every single day. That can't be erased. The judge turned to the last page, the entry from February 8th, the day I landed back on U.S. soil, 4:12 a.m. California time. I'm coming home. Wait for me. She closed the binder. The sound was soft, but it carried. Patricia didn't pause. She placed the second exhibit on the table. Exhibit B, Your Honor. A notarized statement from Carmen Vance, sister of the petitioner, dated March 15th of this year, detailing, objection, Keene said, hearsay. Overruled, Judge Hasegawa said, without looking up. I'll hear it, Patricia continued. Ms. Vance states that she witnessed Eleanor Vance, the petitioner's mother, Deliberately withhold communication from Captain Delgado, cancel scheduled video calls without notice, and instruct the petitioner, Gregory Vance, not to inform Captain Delgado of. That's a lie, Eleanor said. The room went still. Judge Hasagawa removed her glasses. Mrs. Vance, you will speak when spoken to. One more outburst, and I will have the bailiff remove you from this courtroom. Do you understand? Eleanor's mouth opened, then closed. The pearls rose and fell with her breath. Yes, Your Honor. Continue, Miss Okonkwo. Patricia read the rest of Carmen's statement into the record. The canceled calls. 12 of them. The instructions to Greg. The day Eleanor told Carmen, if Mara wanted to be a mother, she wouldn't have left. She made her choice. Now we make ours. Carmen had written it down verbatim because she said it made her stomach turn. When Patricia finished, the judge turned to Greg. Greg didn't look at his mother. He kept his eyes on the table in front of him, and his shoulders dropped about 2 inches. The kind of drop you see in someone who's been holding a weight so long they forgot it was there until the muscle finally gave out. Eleanor didn't move for a full 5 seconds. Then she smoothed her skirt over her knees with both palms, a gesture so precise and controlled, it looked like something she'd practiced in a mirror. Well, she said. Her voice was bright, brittle. I'm glad we could clear that up. No one responded. Patricia closed the binder and slid it back into her bag. The sound of the zipper was very loud in the quiet room. Judge Hasagawa removed her glasses and set them on the desk. I'm going to take a brief recess to review what's been presented. Mrs. Okonkwo, I'd like a copy of that journal indexed and submitted to the court file before we reconvene. Mr. Vance, I assume you'll want to confer with your attorney. The lawyer Eleanor had hired, a thin man with a gray goatee who'd said almost nothing the entire hearing, nodded once. He looked tired. I remember thinking he probably billed by the hour and had already calculated exactly how many billable hours this disaster was going to cost him. We stood as the judge left the room. The bailiff motioned us toward the hallway. I stepped out first. My boots made a solid sound on the linoleum, and I remember noticing that how steady my footsteps were, how my hands weren't shaking the way they'd shaken in February when I first read the court order and sat on the floor of my barracks room at Camp Arifjan, staring at the wall for 3 hours. Patricia touched my elbow. Take 5 minutes, she said quietly. Bathroom, water, whatever. Don't talk to anyone. Not yet. I nodded and walked down the hall to the women's restroom. The door swung shut behind me, and I stood at the sink and looked at my own face in the mirror. 34 years old. 11 months of dessert dust and logistics briefings and waking up at 0400 to record a video of myself reading Goodnight Moon to 2 toddlers who might never see it. The fluorescent light buzzed overhead. I washed my hands with the pink industrial soap from the dispenser and thought about the first video I'd recorded. March 13th, 2023, the day after I landed at Camp Arifjan. I'd been exhausted, still adjusting to the time zone, and I'd held my phone up and said, "Hi, babies, Mama made it. It's very sandy here. I'll show you tomorrow." 37 seconds. I'd almost deleted it because it felt too short, too nothing, but I kept it. And I kept recording every day after that, even the days when I had nothing to say except "Mama loves you," and "I saw a camel today," and "Lucia, I bet you're so tall now." Back in March, I didn't know I was building a case. I was just trying to stay connected to my children. I was just trying to be their mother from 7,000 miles away. The bathroom door opened. I didn't turn around, but I saw the reflection in the mirror. Eleanor in her navy dress, closing the door behind her and standing with her back against it. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she said, "You think you've won something." I dried my hands on a paper towel, folded it once, then again, dropped it in the trash. I think I proved I never left them. Not really. That journal is a prop. Anyone can write things down after the fact. The videos are time-stamped, I said. The entries are dated. The metadata is embedded. You know that. Her jaw tightened. I could see the muscle working under the skin of her cheek, the way her carefully applied blush had settled into the fine lines around her mouth. She was 61 years old, and for the first time since I'd met her at Greg's apartment 7 years ago, she looked every day of it. Greg needed stability, she said. While you were gone, someone had to step in. I was serving my country. Greg knew that when he married me. You knew that when you came to my commissioning ceremony and told me how proud you were. That was before you had children. That was before I had children, I repeated. And then I had children, and I deployed anyway, because that's the job. And I made sure, every single day, that those kids knew their mother loved them. You tried to erase that. You tried to tell a court I was absent, but I wasn't absent. I was just not where you could control me. Eleanor took a step toward me. She was shorter than me by 3 inches, but she carried herself like a woman who'd spent decades being the tallest person in any room she entered. You don't understand what it's like, she said, and her voice had changed. The brittleness was gone, replaced by something lower, something that almost sounded like a real emotion. I raised Greg alone. His father left when he was 6. I built everything. I gave him everything. And then you came along with your uniforms and your orders and your certainty, and you took him. And then you took my grandchildren, and then you left. I didn't take anything, I said. I married a man who asked me to marry him. I gave birth to 2 children who are half him and half me, and I left because I had orders, not because I wanted to go. Eleanor, I recorded 48 videos for my kids. 48. I read them stories. I sang them songs. I showed them the desert sunrise. I was more present from a war zone than some parents are from the next room. She stared at me. Her eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. Eleanor Vance didn't cry, not in front of other people. I read later that there's a name for what I saw in her face that day. Psychologists call it narcissistic injury, the collapse that happens when a person's carefully constructed self-image meets reality and shatters against it. I didn't know the term then. I just knew I was looking at a woman whose story had finally stopped working. You'll never be what I am to those children, she said. No, I said. I'll be their mother. That's different. I walked past her and opened the door. In the hallway, Greg was standing against the wall with his arms crossed, and when he saw me, he straightened up. His mouth opened, then closed. Where are the kids? I asked. With my neighbor, Mrs. Chen. His voice was hoarse. She's been watching them during the hearings. I know, I called her. She sent me photos every week. He flinched. You called Mrs. Chen? Of course I did. She's known me for 4 years, Greg. She didn't believe a word your mother said. The hallway was quiet, except for the distant hum of the building's heating system. Patricia was down at the end of the corridor, talking on her phone, but she looked up when she saw me and raised her eyebrows. I gave her a small nod. She went back to her call. Greg pushed off the wall and took a step toward me. Mara, I didn't know about the journal. I didn't know you'd been doing all that. I told you I was recording videos for them. I told you before I left. You said, that's nice, babe. And then you never asked about it again. He had no answer to that. I watched him search for one. I could see it happening in real time, the way his face shifted through confusion and regret and something that might have been the beginning of understanding. Greg was 36 years old, an accountant with a steady job and a quiet manner, and a lifetime of doing whatever his mother told him to do. I'd known that about him when I married him. I'd thought it was gentleness. I'd thought it was kindness. I hadn't understood yet that there's a difference between being gentle and being incapable of standing up. I was scared, he said finally. She kept saying you'd come back different, that you'd be angry all the time, that the deployment would change you and the kids would suffer. And I believed her. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I looked at him. The father of my children, the man I'd stood beside at an altar in San Antonio when I was 29 and certain about everything. He was crying now, silently, tears tracking down his cheeks and into the collar of his button-down shirt. I believe you're sorry, I said. But sorry doesn't give me back the 3 months I've been home, fighting to see my own kids instead of holding them. Sorry doesn't undo the court order. Sorry doesn't make me trust you. The bailiff opened the courtroom door. Judge is ready. Patricia walked back toward us, slipping her phone into her pocket. You ready? She asked me. I nodded. Judge Hasegawa was already seated when we returned to our places. She had the journal in front of her, open to a random page. I could see the edge of a photo I'd taped in, one of the twins at their 3rd birthday party, Mateo, with blue frosting all over his chin. "I've reviewed the evidence," she said. "I've also reviewed the original emergency custody order, and I have significant concerns about the basis on which it was granted." "Mrs. Okonkwo, I understand you've prepared a motion to vacate." "Yes, Your Honor. I'm granting it. The custody order is vacated effective immediately." Captain Delgado, your parental rights are fully restored. Mr. Vance, I'm ordering a new custody evaluation with a different evaluator, one not recommended by your mother. And Mrs. Vance, she looked directly at Eleanor, who had gone very still in her chair. I would strongly advise you to reconsider your involvement in these proceedings. The court does not look kindly on what appears to be a coordinated effort to alienate a deployed service member from her children. Eleanor said nothing. Her face was tonight. After 97 days, I walked out of the courthouse into a parking lot full of late afternoon sun, the kind that slants low and warm across the asphalt. A woman with a stroller passed me and I didn't flinch. I just watched her go, thinking about the binder, the bank statements, the saved texts, the one recording where Patricia's voice cracked on the word deployment. I hadn't raised my voice once. Not in Eleanor's kitchen, not in mediation, not on the stand. I just kept showing the truth, page by page, until the room got very still. Some people think quiet means weak. I used to think that too. But quiet can be a kind of architecture. You build it slow, you make it solid, and then one day everyone walks inside and sees what you've been holding all along. That's my story. If this reminded you to trust your own memory or to keep the record when no one believes you, take that as your sign. If you know someone who needs to hear it, share this, drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.